Good evening everyone, thanks for coming along tonight. Thanks to Luke and Brian for finally getting me along here. They've invited me about 8 times and every single time I've been out of the country. I was beginning to think it was a bit of a conspiracy, so this time I took them up on the offer. They may live to regret it. So I'm chief person at Ludometrics, which basically means I do anything apart from program, draw, audio. And I'm going to talk to you about Bips. Hands up if you've heard of Bips. That's more. Keep your hands up if you've played Bips. That's less. So Bips is a game that's existed for a long time. It started off as a prototype within this company. Hands up if you've heard of Denki. Wow, that's the first time I've ever got that many people in a room saying that. I'm pleased.
You're a block from their office.
Trust me, that's not always made a difference. So I worked, for those of you who don't know, I've been kicking around the Scottish games industry for far too many years. Started off making games for WAP phones. Hands up if you've heard of WAP phones. Wow. That was just as much fun as it sounded. And then J2ME stuff. And if you want to talk about device fragmentation, that's the place to go. And then I ended up at Denki for a couple of years where I spent a bunch of time working on Quarrel. And those of you who know the story of Quarrel know that that went through a slightly unhappy phase, which is when I moved back down to Glasgow and set up Ludometrics, which was designed as a thing that would let me do things. It was really, that was the business plan. And I worked with a variety of companies, a theatre company called Cryptic, made a kind of app that ties in with their shows and so on. Worked with the Comedy Unit to make a Gary Tank Commander app, which was lots of fun. And then eventually fell back into making games, and then sort of this time last year, I guess, Denki approached me with an opportunity where their sort of main team was fully booked up, working on other projects. They'd been approached to make a game based on this prototype Bips, and they wanted to put an external team together to try their processes, the development design processes, outside of their own four walls, I guess. And this is what we set out to make. Essentially a 21st century arcade game. And this is the story. So basically you are a bip, which is a binary particle. It's science, see? And you have to collect things and avoid other things. You can tell which are the bad things because they're kind of red, and the good things are kind of green and or white. So I'm just going to run through a kind of quick post-mortem. I can't go into sort of full details for reasons which, just because reasons. And I'll do sort of 5 things that went well and 5 things that could have went well. So first thing that went well was that we did make a 21st century toy. We set out to make something that we felt comfortable saying was an arcade game, but with modern sensibilities. So if you think about the difference between original Pac-Man and Pac-Man Championship Edition, that was what we set out to make something in line with that, and we're incredibly proud of the results. It was a fun project to work on, which isn't often the case. Anyone who's worked on more than 3 projects probably knows that feeling. But we're really, really happy with we made a game that we played, which is a good start. The feedback we've had from actual players that we don't even know has been really good. And even feedback from people who we do know and like to tell us to our face how much they hate what we've worked on has been positive. So that's definitely a bonus. The second thing I think that worked well was actually the process. Now, I know Sean and some other guys at Denki have been working with some of the DARE teams. And Denki's process is a bit different from anywhere else that I've worked. And I'm not going to try and fully explain it here because there are other people here to speak. But it's a process that feels counterintuitive, So, for example, we bring in art late, so everything is just blocks early on. And I was at GDC earlier in the year, and Spry Fox did a talk about their process. And lo and behold, one of their points was bringing in art late. And I was like, yeah. But apparently that blew the mind of at least 7 other people sitting around me in the audience. And the reason that becomes, if you bring in good-looking art early, you distract yourself and you misplace faith in how good the game actually is. So it's incredibly misleading to make your game look good early on. And I will show you what Bips look like for a long time in just a minute. And part of that was that we took our time to find the fun. So we spent from around start of August to maybe early November just trying to figure, even though we had a prototype of what the game was, what the control system was, figuring out what the game actually was. And that seems like a hell of a long time considering what the game actually is, but we couldn't have done it without, the game wouldn't be what it is without having spent that time up front. And it, again, at GDC, I saw someone else, hands up if you heard of Dylan Cuthbert. Okay, have you heard of Star Fox? Yeah, you made Star Fox. So he was talking about what he calls design occlusion. And I went to see the talk because I had no idea what he meant by design occlusion. But it turns out what he meant was put lots of stuff in the game and then keep taking it out and putting it back in again until you find what that game is actually about. And programmers hate it, but it's actually incredibly important because sometimes you'll have something which you think is a core feature. So the example he gave was Star Fox, where initially they came from a background of working with Argonaut and making Starglider, which is this kind of classic British game from the 80s. And it was a full 3D, full roaming, could fly anywhere, shoot anything. And then Nintendo came along, or specifically Miyamoto came along and said, take out 3D roaming, you're only going straight into the screen. And their reaction was, that's not going to be the same game, it's not going to be fun. And lo and behold, that's actually where they found the fun. So it turned out that being able to fly anywhere was a massive distraction and was blinding them to actually creating a game that was interesting. So this is what Bips looked like. This is version 7. At one point we were churning out one version a day, really sort of cranking through things. And these, the blue things, are exits that would let you move on to the next level, and different doors had different rules for where you went to go. It turned out these were a massive distraction, and we totally didn't need them. But you can see it's basically Bips. If you've played the game, you know, that's Bips. But it looks horrible, doesn't it? But it was good enough for us to get on and actually make a game. So this is version 51-ish. It does not look like that, but you can anymore. But you can see that the exits have gone. The basic structure for the game is there, and you'll also notice that we have like the front end. There's a title screen on the game that tells you how to play. There's all sorts of level progression ceremonies and so on. It's basically a game. I mean, you could have, you know, it was a complete product at all times, even though it looked like hell in some cases. And we had audio throughout as well. Obviously not plugged in or anything. Sorry? No, that's fine. It actually sounds the same. And then we ended up with this, which is the version that if you played it, you'll be more familiar with. So you can see everything is basically a sort of evolution of what was there before. But the basic ideas were all in there earlier on. It just looks better with each version. So this is pretty close. This was the version we had sort of late. Oh God, I'm looking at it now and there's all sorts of problems. But there's this was sort of before Christmas, just before we deployed it in a sort of public arena. And let real people play it, which is always scary. So the fourth thing that I think worked well was our choice of technology. Constant refrain over the last couple of years is that, or possibly longer, is that Flash is dead. and turns out it actually works pretty well if you treat it right. We used a framework called Starling, which is actually sponsored by Adobe. It uses Stage 3D, which basically means that it's shinier and faster, and actually uses the capabilities of modern graphics cards and so on. And that's worked really well. We had a version early on running on different platforms and so on, but it basically let us do everything we needed to do, and it didn't stop us doing anything, and it didn't stop the game being made, which is always the fear when you start working with a new technology. And the last thing I want to give a shout out to is the actual team behind the game. Also, we work with Denki, but the team I put together at Ludometrics had never all worked together before on a game in the same room. We'd all worked together on different games, like various combinations of the group, and we ended up feeling like a real crack team of Lego men, because we have such stylish haircuts and such. And it was just an incredibly smooth process from beginning to end, which is kind of amazing to actually go through that and everything go somewhat smoothly, or at least as smoothly as any other project I've ever worked on, even with groups of guys that I've worked with for a couple of years beforehand. And also the sort of collaboration aspect of it was something that we hadn't really done with an external company other than a publisher, so to be working with another developer, albeit one that I knew really well anyway, was interesting, exciting and fun all at the same time. And we got a good product out of it. So what went less well? The name. So turns out that Bips is actually quite hard for people to get a handle on, and I've seen it mentioned as blips, bippers, spib once, and also it's an incredibly hard name to get a Google alert on, because Bips happens to be the nickname of a massive Bollywood star. I don't mean she's massive, I mean she's popular, but yeah, it's like you can't decipher an email which has literally thousands of mentions of this one woman on the internet, like to find your one mention of a game. Really hard. So I would suggest that in future we will research names of games harder. The second thing, this isn't something that went badly, because it turns out multiplayer is tons of fun, but we didn't actually have it in the final game for reasons. And it's a shame, because it was a really, you were basically on the same machine playing against, well, we had at one point we had it with 4 players, and it was a huge amount of fun. I think the proximity anger aspect of it works particularly well, especially when you steal bits from other people and so on. Third thing is that we took our time to find the fun. Now you'll notice that's the same thing as the third thing in what went well. So actually took us, if we knew then what we know now about how the project was going to pan out in its whole, we would have done things a bit differently and found the fun a lot earlier and sort of rejig things, and the whole schedule would have looked completely different. You'd have been playing the game far earlier, and this whole presentation would be happening in a different way. So it was good that we took time to figure out what the game actually was, but at the same time it was bad that we took so long to find out what the game actually was. The Facebook. So last week, I sort of picked up, I don't know if anyone else did, Greenie said that they saw more opportunity in BlackBerry games than they do in Facebook games. So when the project started, Facebook was a thing that was popular and made money. And as it turned out, that entire market shifted as we were making the game. That in itself isn't a bad thing, because obviously we can take it in a technology that we can take to other platforms, but we don't necessarily have the scope to do that without a real commercial partner involved. On the plus side, we did get a lot of kudos for the way we integrate friends into the game, which is beyond just having a map with your friends at level 7, or 365 if you're playing Candy Crush or whatever. You actually are competing live. I don't know if you noticed there's a dynamic leaderboard, so you see exactly which friend you're coming up on next. When you pass that friend, they turn into a token on the board that you can collect. So there's a real, well, for us at least, beating each other, there's a real, that pushes a button to actually beat your friends into submission. But ultimately, all this comes down to a sort of overall lack from both ourselves and from Denki's point of view of just having the control to do what we needed to do. And as I say, having the knowledge now that if we'd had that at the start, the whole project would have been structured differently, and this would be a different talk, I think it's fair to say. Possibly. It may still have been well, it would still have been a postmortem. It may have been had a slightly different story. But overall, as I say, we were really happy with the product that we made. Be sticking around so you can ask me questions or whatever. But in the meantime, I would just ask you to play the game. Tell your friends to play the game too. And hopefully that was of some use to you. Here's a pre-prepared question.
Couple questions.
No.
Sounds like the design process is already quite pared down, to get you quickly looking for the fun. I don't know how you could make it leaner.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying there that you wouldn't take so much time. So would you basically set a low bar for the fun, and set a lower bar for fun because it's quicker and you can get it out there, people will play it quicker? Or what would you do then?
I think one of the things that we had early on was the multiplayer aspect, and I think we would maybe skip that. That would buy us a chunk of time, but that was a requirement essentially.
The other thing was you said lack of control, but I'm not sure what you meant by control. What couldn't you play? Maybe you can't say specifics, right? But
Yeah.
is it just basically a requirements of the game kind of thing?
There's a guy sitting directly behind you who's going to answer this question. Like,
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into it. It's my neck of mine. I'm from Denki. Basically, so Ludometrics were developing the product, Denki were producing the product, we were attached to a publisher, we were publishing the product. The publisher got in touch with us because they were developing very specific flash-based multiplayer technology, and so we spent the first half of development with that vision, is like make a really great arcade game for flash living multiplayer technology. Halfway through that disappeared, and then it's like, okay, look over there, make a single player game of Bips that is great. And that's where the lack of control came in. It's like we were beholden to other people's sort of vision and financing at that point, which is a sad reality of game development.
yeah. Welcome to real life.
Thanks.
Is there still room to go ahead and do that original vision of the multiplayer game further down the line?
If you've got your checkbook,
Version online, isn't it?
well, there may be in a secret location.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's your task for tonight, homework. So you can figure out where we're in there. It's really not that hard to guess. But there is a version online that you can play.
So if you can take down servers, then
Yeah, then we can take that to a publisher and we'll get the game in. Yep.
I was just wondering, you showed all the different kind of versions and refinements. You know, it seemed like a lot of permutations of playing with the idea.
That was like a tenth of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was just wondering, at what point do you kind of bring in external people to play test in that process, or was it primarily, for the most part, like internally with the team, just kind of testing it out and trying out?
Yeah, the first filter was me, and the next filter was Sean. The next filter was other people in Denki, and then the ultimate client. But then we did do a few spot tests as we went along. We did one in Glasgow Cali, actually. Did you try that?
I did,
Yeah. We got some really interesting feedback about what the game was about there.
I think I was the mother ducky, baby duckies.
Oh, was that you?
Yeah.
Oh man. Crazy. Don't know why you were smoking that, dude. Yeah, it's always difficult doing a playtest, especially when I'm not actually there watching what's happening. And metrics will tell you one thing, but they don't actually tell you what the problem is necessarily. So there was, when we put the game sort of soft launch it just before Christmas, and we had a bunch of friends and family play it, and we could see what the data was telling us, but it didn't make any sense. And then a friend said something about, I can't remember the specifics now, but she said something, she said, oh, but I don't want to give you negative feedback. Just my son's being harsh. And I'm like, no, give me the negative feedback. I need the negative feedback. That's the only thing that's going to help. And sure enough, she told me what he'd said. I was like, ah, shit, that's what the problem is. Okay, I need to do. I like to swear on the tape. You can beat it. And,
We've already had talks from the backlog, we're fine.
yeah, true. So that's, you kind of need the combination of both. So doing playtests as we're going is fine, but in some respects, because the game changed, like from when Dave played it to what it became and what we actually had in our head for what it was going to become, it kind of only gave us a little bit of useful information. So you kind of have to pair up both, and also just metrics aren't a substitute for product vision. You need the product vision in the first place for the metrics to have any context. Was there a question over?
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you had the problem with the name, the conflict you had, why didn't you change it? Then I kind of realised it's probably far too late before you realised it.
But it's been reviewed 3 times. Not that that's, you could always do a rebranding exercise like the post office or something like that, but that worked well for them, didn't it? So, yeah, it's one of these things. It kind of always been called Bips, and that was kind of what we knew it as. And yeah, I think naming something is incredibly hard. What is that? There's a computer science joke about the 2 hardest things in computer science are caching, or knowing when to expire a cache, and naming things. And naming things is the single hardest thing I've ever done, and it's just ridiculously difficult to do it well. It's easy to say in hindsight something like Yahoo is a great name. It's like, I was there when Yahoo started. Like, it wasn't a great name. And sometimes things like we is another good example. It's like, what the hell is that? But yeah, they have their reasons and whatever. But I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But in the end, it just becomes accepted. So it's kind of difficult to change it once it's out there, I guess. But yeah, it's something to bear in mind. Geez, that's 2 already.
Well, probably just a couple of questions. So you were mentioning about finding the fun and also taking bits out from the back end. So I was just wondering, is how you manage that process and finding the fun and chucking things in and taking them out, putting them back in experimentation? Is that a fraught process, or is it a...
More so for the programmers, I think. Yeah, it's just kind of, it's one of these things where you try a bunch of stuff and see what works, and then try combinations. And I mean, it wasn't done it was systemic, but not like completely rote. So we knew what we were trying to achieve and what kind of feel we wanted. So it was a case of kind of just one at a time, basically, only change one. In that sense, it was proper science, and you'd only change one variable. And then, you kind of veer in, you kind of narrow in on what the game actually wants to be. The game tells you what it wants to be, is the best way of putting it.
How do you know when to stop that?
Sorry?
How do you know when to stop? What?
We knew when to stop.
How did you do that?
Time was one thing.
Is that your constraint? You had to do it in 6 months.
Yeah, and we knew what we needed to find, and we knew when we were narrowing in on it. So I think it's one of these things you kind of have to know what you're prepared to commit to that process. So, like, I mean, we could have spent another 6 months tweaking, but by that point you're at diminishing returns, so you don't have to. Or if you don't find any fun, bin it and move on.
What percentage fund, sorry, I'm stealing this question, kind of the same thing, but what percentage fund do you think you found? Because where's the point when you start? If it's 50%, is that good enough to put a game out? Or do you have to, like, you know?
It depends on how you, it depends, I guess, on what the scope of the product you're trying to make is. So the basic Bip mechanic of just touching a button to change direction and collecting things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of level design features and ideas and power-ups and obstacles and stuff that we threw out. Partly because they didn't work, or partly because they were too hard to actually explain to someone. You've only got a fraction of a second to actually let someone know that something new's happening, and you kind of need to be able to figure it out really quickly. And a lot of things don't lend themselves well to that, so you could remove them pretty quickly. So the whole fun space continuum is fairly large. It's not the biggest, but it's fairly expansive for the game. So there's certainly a lot more we could do with it, and that, I guess, if we went back and made a multiplayer version, then we could explore more of that. And we actually did do more of that with we started off with just a sort of classic arcade thing, put in your quarter, play for as long as you don't die, and then we went back and added a kind of more of a level-based aspect to it, where it's kind of more scripted. There are boss levels, so that was a different way we could slice it, and I think there's lots more that we could do with it. But I think that one of the keys to ideas is, can you keep generating new ideas off of it? And we certainly didn't stop generating new ideas off of it. So if you run out of things to think up, then you probably hit your wall, but we certainly didn't do that. So, okay, back to Brian.
Just the second question was about the dynamic leaderboard.
Yeah.
I've played the game, I've probably found that a nice feature. See my face of my grim friends, and I'm not quite get that bastard. Special look. So when
It was spectacularly good at it, wasn't it? It's freakishly good. Almost like it was cheating.
I think he's
It's some sort of AI bot.
yeah, probably he hacked it.
Yeah.
So when did that come into the process? Was that the kind of thing left over from the multiplayer, or was that something that came later because the integration with Facebook, or?
Yeah, it was partly through, I mean, the original stuff, we didn't have, like the first sort of 3 or 4 months didn't have any Facebook integration, so that partly came from thinking about how best to take advantage of what the information Facebook can give you. So, I don't remember, can you remember specifically how, kind of, yeah, you know how you thought it up? Yeah, so for those who don't know, I didn't mention that, Dave Jones of Scottish games industry fame was the executive producer on the game, so it came from his brain. But yeah, but it's a perfect fit, so and it worked really, really well.
So it was for the fact that you had because you were talking about taking elements out, felt like putting really a big element in quite late in the development. And then go to slightly less, find the fun early.
That's kind of more of a fun enhancer, I'd say. Because the game is already fun, and that element just amps it, basically. Any more? Oh God, okay.
Well, just, I mean, I'm sort of thinking out loud here, there's probably a number that you have to reach in terms of referrals related to how long people play it, like if I invite 5 friends, and then they invite 5 friends, there's probably a number that snowballs, and I did a bad Facebook game that some people liked, but they liked it a lot, but they didn't invite many people, and it just sort of died after months of looking quite cool. So I'm wondering, how viral was it? Did you find, or maybe you can't say, but how many people were people referring? Do you have any idea of that kind of thing?
Do you have?
Because it seemed my entire feed were playing it all the time. He was on it every day.
Yeah.
So it looked to me like everybody loved it. So I guess it must have its audience.
There's a couple more things we could have done to get into Facebook systems to help with that, I think. But it's trying to get that balance between just, you know, relentlessly spamming some people, and like I have like 1 billion Candy Crush requests which I will not respond to, and you know, I think the whole team didn't want to make something that did that, but unfortunately that's the way you make something snowball on Facebook. So we have a kind of hardcore cadre of players on the game, which is nice.
Still playing?
Yeah. So we're quite happy to leave it. We're not, you know, do a playfish and pull the servers or any EA, I guess. So, but I mean, we're happy enough with what it's doing. We know there's a lot more we could do with it, but right now it doesn't make sense for ourselves or Denki to actually go after that.
Try any of the non-in-game promotional methods, like adverts or, you know, did you try to promote it through those means and it didn't work?
Yeah. So Facebook phoned us when the game went live and got some coverage and said, yeah, you should do some ads. Okay, Mr. Facebook, what do you recommend? Oh, well, most of our partners are spending $50,000 a day on ads. Okay, fine, Mr. Facebook. So they do work. We did, or Sean ran some experiments on how do we draw new players into the game, do they stick around, and it turned out like not horrifically expensive to get people to install the game, based, you know, kind of really narrowing the search down. But it didn't make sense to sort of really scale that up and spend $50,000 a day on it. That's fine if you've got that sort of model figured out, but we don't, so it doesn't make sense for us to do that.
I was going to spend more than I promised no more. If I recall correctly, I might not, they re-monetize it, is that you can get credits?
Yeah.
If I go to keep playing?
Quarters,
So-
essentially.
Quarters, essentially. So, do you have any comments or thoughts on how that worked as a monetization strategy or anything else? You know?
How much can I say? I'll say what I want. That's a threat. We thought it was lovely because it matched that model, the arcade model, perfectly. But it doesn't work to the level we need it to. Is probably the fairest way of saying. And again, it's that tension between, you know, just jamming that message into your face every 3 seconds, or letting you play the damn game. Yeah, it's a tricky tension.
It's one of those things.
Yeah, we'll get it right one day.
Cheers. Thank you for being patient.
Anyone else? Everyone wants to be here. Okay, thanks for listening.
Thank you.